Hello, in my last two videos I started to talk about how the neurological condition that I am suffering from started, and about the struggle I was getting in trying to get a diagnosis, and about the two neurologists that I saw over the first few months. Having seen the second neurologist, I was sort of left in a bit of a no man's land. One of the problems was that my own GP was not well during much of this time, so I would see a different locum every time. But also that my GP didn't know where to send me next. I did mention to him ME, but he didn't feel that my symptoms, from what he knew, matched ME symptoms, because although I did have fatigue, particularly at the beginning, and I got tired after doing very little, I had so many other neurological symptoms that he really wasn't sure that ME was the right label to give it, and he didn't really know who to send me to next. In fact, he even went as far as saying to see if I could find someone to send me to. I did start to search the internet, and the more I searched on the internet, the more it looked as if perhaps that it wasn't ME, but it might be MS, because I seem to have so many symptoms that that you would expect with an MS patient, particularly with the walking problems and the involuntary movements and things, and it did make me start to wonder. And as I started to research, I was starting to think that might be the way. But during my research, on the internet, I went to a couple of forums that were for MS patients, and one of the things that I found was the amount of people with neurological conditions who, like me, didn't have a diagnosis. I found a number of people on one particular website who had all sorts of terrible neurological conditions, but couldn't get an answer from a neurologist. I found other people who had MS, who had spent years before they actually got a diagnosis of MS in sort of a limbo land of not being well but not being told what's wrong. So that was quite an experience. Anyhow, eventually I did go back to my doctor, and I had also found out about the National ME Centre in Romford, I believe it is, and I did say about being referred there, and they do charge a fee, which usually the local PCT will cover, but my doctor phoned them and they wouldn't, and they suggested another neurologist, so it was off to neurologist number 3. This time I saw him, this was in October, so quite a few months have now passed, and he saw me blind. I did mention to my GP that I wondered whether the second neurologist, as he was a colleague of the first one, had read his notes and really wasn't looking at me with fresh eyes. So the third one actually saw me blind. He didn't even have any of my notes, and he did the usual neurological exam. But he did say to me that it might be, having done everything, that they won't know what it is. So he did warn me that that was possibly the case, but he did the neurological exam and he decided that I needed to be admitted into hospital for a couple of days for various tests to be done. And in January of this year I went into hospital over a 2-day period, and I had another MRI, this time a full one of my brain and my spinal cord. I had a lumbar puncture, I had to see a neuropsychiatrist, I had a chest x-ray, various blood tests, a whole load of things were done, and 6 weeks later, because I was starting to get a little bit concerned, because it was about a 3-month wait until I saw the neurologist again, I phoned up to find out what was going on, and I spoke to one of his colleagues, and they said that they had all the data back and they couldn't actually find anything that was wrong. And he said that from his knowledge he thought that the most likely cause of my symptoms was ME, and it wasn't that easy to accept that, because whenever you read anything in about ME, particularly the protocol that's used, the criteria for ME. Fatigue and flu-like symptoms always seem to be ones that are necessary for a diagnosis, and yet that isn't something I really suffer from. I don't get a huge amount of pain. I get a lot of discomfort from the movements, particularly when I'm trying to relax, because the involuntary movements are worse then. But I don't really get much pain, and the other thing is that I have drop foot, rather like someone with MS, and when I walk, my toe drags on the ground. I can't walk very far. My legs stiffen, and I generally can't walk very far at all, and I have to use a stick. So I've now got myself a scooter so that I can get around. So I feel a bit of an old git, but I managed to get around on that. So it's not been easy to come to terms with this possibly being ME. But having done more research, I found that ME is more to do with neurological symptoms, and the problem that has come about is that ME has been lumped together with CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, and really it's more than just chronic fatigue. It's much more than chronic fatigue, and it affects every part. Your thinking, it affects your mobility, it affects my speech, but it affects everyone in many different ways. And as I've said once before on these videos, there is such a need for proper biomedical research to be done, and for the social psychological model that is so often used to be abandoned. It might be that some people with chronic fatigue do benefit from things like GET and CBT, but people who have a real physical illness, a real neurological illness, need to be treated as needing physical treatment, and not just as having something psychologically wrong. And really that's the reason I'm making this series of videos, and I've put together a website as well if you would like to have a look, and I'll put those on the titles at the end of this film, which really just goes through my life story again, and you can leave comments as well, which will help. All of this will help to raise awareness. Thank you for watching this video.